Imagine this scenario for a second. You are standing on the precipice of the biggest, most consequential acquisition in the history of your entire organization.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about a minor pivot or like a small departmental budget increase here. You are about to spend nearly $10 million on a single monumental investment.
That is a massive amount of pressure.
Right. Now, because you are a rational, responsible leader, you don't just, write a check on a whim. To make sure you aren't making a colossal mistake, you spend 14 agonizing months running every conceivable diagnostic test known to modern science.
So you do the homework, you do all the due diligence.
Exactly. You hire top-tier legal teams to trace the paperwork back decades, scrutinizing every single signature. You bring in world-renowned scientists who use, like electron microscopes and mass spectrometry, to analyze the actual molecular structure of your investment.
You build a mountain of data.
A literal mountain of hard, undeniable, empirical data. And it all points in one unified, comforting direction. This is a perfect, flawless deal.
Okay, so you're ready to celebrate, right?
You are. You invite an outsider into the room to pop the champagne. But this outsider walks in, takes one look like a 2-second glance, barely breaking their stride, and instantly knows that your multi-million-dollar investment is a complete and total disaster.
Oh, man, that is a nightmare scenario.
It really is. So the question for you to ponder today is this. Can a split-second feeling, like a sudden gut reaction in the literal blink of an eye, ever truly outweigh a mountain of meticulously gathered data?
And that question right there is the exact mission of this deep dive. Today, we're exploring the introduction to Malcolm Gladwell's groundbreaking work, Blink.
Such a good book.
It really is. And we're looking specifically at this fascinating chapter called The Statue That Didn't Look Right. We're going to look really closely at how the human brain makes incredibly complex decisions in the blink of an eye.
Which is so relevant for, well, pretty much everyone.
Absolutely. For anyone in business, leadership, or entrepreneurship, understanding this hidden mental machinery isn't just, an interesting psychological quirk to bring up at dinner parties. It is a massive competitive advantage.
Because it helps you make better choices.
Exactly. You're about to learn how to navigate high-stakes choices without drowning in information overload. And you'll see why the most powerful, highly calibrated computer you will ever use in a negotiation is actually already sitting right inside your own head.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand how this mental computer works, we have to travel back to the fall of 1983.
The Getty Museum, right?
Yeah, the J. Paul Getty Museum in California. They are approached by an art dealer named Gianfranco Becchina. And he brings them something that honestly seemed almost too good to be true.
He brings them a Koros.
Right. Now, for those who might not spend their weekends browsing ancient Greek antiquities, let's paint a picture of what this actually is.
Good idea. A Koros is a sculpture of a nude male youth. They have very specific, rigid stance, left leg striding slightly forward, arms pinned right at their sides.
And they're incredibly old.
Right, very old. They date back to the 6th century BC. From a historical perspective, there are only about 200 of these in existence anywhere in the world.
And mostly they're just, in terrible condition.
Yeah, due to the ravages of time, wars, earthquakes, almost all of them have been pulled out of the ground, completely shattered. Usually they're just reduced to a bunch of tragic little fragments.
But the statue Becchina brings to the Getty, it is almost perfectly preserved. I mean, it stands nearly 7 feet tall.
Oh.
It has this incredible light-colored glowing surface. It is quite literally the archaeological find of a lifetime. And the asking price is just under $10 million.
Which is a huge sum, especially in 1983.
Yeah.
So the Getty, being a well-funded institution, they don't just blindly write a check.
No, they do exactly what any responsible business or venture capital firm would do. They move with extreme caution.
Right. They take the statue on loan, and they launch this absolutely massive 14-month investigation to figure out if it's the real deal.
And the rigor of this investigation really cannot be overstated.
Huh.
It's a textbook example of what we in the modern business world would call exhaustive due diligence.
So where do they even start with something like that?
First, the Getty's legal department goes to work. They demand documentation, provenance, a clear chain of custody.
Which makes sense. You need the receipts.
Exactly. And Becchina provides this thick sheaf of papers tracing the statue's history. The records show it had been in the private collection of a Swiss physician named Laufenberger since the 1930s.
Okay, so there's a paper trail.
Right.
Yeah.
And it shows Laufenberger bought it from a very well-known, reputable Greek art dealer named Roussos. So the paper trail looks completely solid. It tells this coherent, documented story.
But the Getty being thorough, they don't just stop at the paperwork, do
No, they bring in a highly respected geologist from the University of California, Dr. Stanley Margolis, to conduct a rigorous scientific analysis.
And this is where it starts sounding less like an art appraisal and more like a CSI episode, right?
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Margolis spends 2 full days just examining the surface of the statue with a high-resolution stereo microscope.
Just looking at the surface?
Yeah, he's looking for tool marks, signs of weathering, any microscopic anomalies. Then he actually extracts a core sample, a physical piece of the marble, from just below the right knee of the statue.
Wow, taking a drill to a $10 million statue.
Yeah. And he takes this sample back to his lab and runs it through an absolute gauntlet of advanced scientific machinery. He uses an electron microprobe, mass spectrometry, X-ray diffraction, and X-ray fluorescence.
Okay, I have to admit, when I read that list of equipment in the source material, my eyes glazed over just a little bit.
Right. It's a lot of jargon.
We hear terms like mass spectrometry thrown around a lot when people want to sound authoritative, but what is that actually doing? How does a machine tell you if a rock is from ancient Greece or a modern workshop in somebody's garage?
That is a vital question, because understanding the science explains why the Getty felt so secure. Mass spectrometry is essentially a highly advanced sorting machine at the atomic level.
Okay, so atomic sorting, how does it work?
Well, you take a tiny piece of the marble, vaporize it, and blast it with a beam of electrons to turn the atoms into charged ions. Then you accelerate those ions through a magnetic field.
This sounds incredibly complex.
It is, but the concept is simple. Because different chemical elements have different weights or masses, the magnetic field bends their paths by different amounts. Lighter ions bend a lot, heavier ions bend a little.
Ah, I see. So by measuring exactly where they land, the machine gives you this incredibly precise molecular fingerprint of the rock's composition.
Exactly. It's basically a highly advanced barcode scanner for atoms. It tells you the exact chemical recipe of this specific piece of stone.
That is fascinating. And what does Dr. Margolis find with this atomic barcode scanner?
His findings are incredibly specific and deeply compelling. He concludes the statue is made of dolomite marble, specifically from the ancient Cape Vathy quarry on the island of Thasos.
Okay, so the material matches the region, but does it match the timeline?
Well, here is the most crucial part of his findings. He discovers that the surface of the statue is covered in a thin, microscopic layer of calcite.
Calcite, why does that matter?
To understand why that matters, we have to look at the chemistry of weathering. Dolomite marble only turns into calcite over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years as it interacts with the environment.
Oh, I get it. It's a slow, natural, chemical aging process. You can't just paint calcite on.
Exactly. It has to form structurally from the dolomite itself. So to the Getty, this is the ultimate smoking gun.
Right. It's not just that the rock is from the right quarry. It's that the actual surface chemistry proves it has been sitting around aging for millennia.
Yep. It supposedly cannot be rushed. That was the overwhelming consensus. Margolis tells the Getty, look, this is old. It is an ancient antiquity. It is unequivocally not a contemporary fake.
So armed with this bulletproof scientific validation and the flawless legal paperwork, the Getty buys the statue.
They do. They proudly put it on display. The New York Times runs a glowing front-page story. The museum's curator of antiquities even writes a triumphant, scholarly article in a major art journal.
On paper, it is a flawless, data-backed acquisition.
Okay, let's pause here and connect this to our listeners' world. Because this story is exactly like a modern startup spending a year doing endless A/B testing.
Oh, absolutely. It's like doing comprehensive market research, holding focus groups in 5 different cities and running, Monte Carlo simulations on your financial models before launching a product.
We are deeply culturally conditioned to believe that more data equals a safer decision. Like if you have enough spreadsheets, if you have enough metrics, if you have an electron microscope backing you up, you can't possibly fail.
The Getty was using all of this incredibly dense scientific data as a security blanket.
But wait, isn't doing the homework the responsible thing to do? At what point does due diligence just become data theater?
That is exactly the pushback we need to have. Because yes, doing the homework is vital. You wouldn't buy a $10 million company without looking at their tax returns.
Right. That would be reckless.
But there is a tipping point where we stop using data to inform our judgment and start using data to replace our judgment. We get so zoomed in on the molecular structure of the calcite or, the click-through rate of a single ad variant that we lose the ability to see the whole board.
The Getty checked every possible analytical box.
Right.
They built a fortress of empirical evidence. But in doing so, they completely blinded themselves to the bigger picture.
Which raises an important question. If we are so reliant on empirical data to make us feel secure, what happens when that meticulously gathered data creates a false sense of security?
Because while the Getty was busy celebrating their perfect, scientifically validated acquisition, a completely different, much quieter narrative was about to unfold.
Right, the glorious $10 million Koros had a fundamental, fatal problem that no mass spectrometer could detect.
It simply didn't look right to the people who truly, deeply knew Greek art.
And this is where the story pivots from a scientific triumph to an absolute psychological mystery.
The very first person to point this out was an Italian art historian named Federico Zeri. And he was actually on the Getty's board of trustees, so he wasn't some random skeptic.
He was invested in the museum's success.
Right. So in December of 1983, they take him down to the restoration studio to see it. He looks at this majestic 7-foot statue, and he finds his eyes immediately, almost against his will, drawn to the sculpture's fingernails.
The fingernails, that's so specific.
Yeah. He can't even articulate exactly what is wrong. He just feels a deep sense of unease. He just feels that the fingernails are wrong.
And then comes Evelyn Harrison, really.
Yes, she is one of the world's absolute foremost experts on Greek sculpture. The curator takes her down, proudly swishes the protective cloth off the top of the statue, and beams, saying, well, it isn't ours yet, but it will be in a couple of weeks.
And what does she say?
She takes one look, a fraction of a second, and just says, I'm sorry to hear that.
Wow. And notice the language there. She didn't say the isotopic analysis, the marble is inconsistent. She didn't say the proportions of the clavicle are historically inaccurate.
She didn't consciously know what she saw in that very first moment.
Exactly. All she had was a hunch, a deeply instinctive, almost physical sense that something was fundamentally amiss.
A few months later, the Getty brings in Thomas Hoving, the former director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
He has a really interesting approach to seeing new art, doesn't he?
He does. He has this fascinating habit of noting the very first word that pops into his head when he sees something new. When he looks at the Koros, the word that flashes in his mind is fresh.
Which is a terrible word to associate with a 2,000-year-old antiquity.
Right. He later realized it looked to him like the statue had been dipped in the best cafe latte from Starbucks. He actually turns to the curator and says, if you have paid for this, try to get your money back. If you haven't, don't.
It just keeps escalating. The Getty must be getting incredibly nervous at this point.
Oh, yeah. They have all the data on their side, but these titans of the art world are walking in and shaking their heads. So they wrap the statue up, ship it to Athens, and hold a special high-stakes symposium.
With the most senior sculpture experts in Greece.
And the reaction of this symposium is just visceral. George Despinas, the head of the Acropolis Museum, takes one look at it and physically turns pale.
Turns pale, just from looking at it.
Yeah. He says anyone who has ever seen a sculpture actually come out of the ground can tell this thing has never been in the ground.
Wow.
Georgios Dantas, the head of the Archaeological Society in Athens, says that looking at it made him feel cold, like there was a physical sheet of glass between him and the work.
And then there's Angelos Delivorous, the director of the Benaki Museum.
Right, he stands up, talks a bit about style contradictions, but then he just admits the raw truth. He says the moment he laid eyes on it, he felt a wave of intuitive repulsion.
Intuitive repulsion. None of them could instantly, logically prove it was a fake in that room. But they knew.
What is so fascinating here is the stark, almost comical contrast in methodology.
Mm-hmm.
On one side, you have the Getty, armed with lawyers, geologists, massive budgets, and 14 months of painstaking investigation.
Coming to one firm, unyielding conclusion.
And on the exact opposite side, you have a handful of the world's top experts arriving at the exact opposite conclusion in a matter of seconds.
And they're relying on things that sound entirely unscientific. Feelings of coldness, random words popping into their heads, a fixation on fingernails.
For a while, it was this tense standoff between the data and the gut. But then, piece by piece, the Getty's impenetrable mountain of hard data began to collapse.
This is my favorite part of the story because it shows how easily data can be manipulated if you aren't looking at the whole picture.
Totally. Remember that supposedly ironclad paper trail?
Total fiction. When investigators actually looked closely at the letters tracing the statue back to the Swiss physician in the 1930s, they noticed something absurd.
What was it?
The letters had postal codes on them. Postal codes didn't even exist in that region until 20 years after the letters were supposedly written.
Oh my gosh, what a massive oversight.
And another letter referenced a specific bank account that wasn't even opened until 1963. The forger had gone to great lengths but missed the basic historical details.
The physical style of the statue also unraveled under closer scrutiny, right?
Yes, initially the Getty believed it was a perfect match for a specific era. But when art historians finally took the time to logically deconstruct what their intuition had already told them, they realized the statue was a bizarre Frankenstein monster.
A Frankenstein monster of different styles.
Exactly. Archaic Greek art has very specific rules. But this statue had proportions that looked like a specific Kouros housed in Munich. Its hair was carved in a style that matched a different Kouros in New York.
Oh, I see.
And its feet were carved in a completely modern style that didn't match ancient techniques at all. A real artist in the 6th century BC operates within the organic style of their time.
Whereas a modern forger looks at a textbook and cobbles together different famous examples into one pastiche.
Right. It turns out the statue it most closely resembled was a smaller fig found in a forger's workshop in Rome in the early 1980s.
But wait, what about that bulletproof scientific evidence, the electron microprobe, the dolomite turning into calcite over thousands of years? Dr. Margolis said that was impossible to fake.
And that is the danger of assuming science cannot be hacked. Another independent geologist eventually took a closer look at that centuries-long chemical aging process.
And what did they find?
He realized that while it normally takes millennia in nature, you could actually fake that entire chemical transformation in a couple of months using something surprisingly low-tech.
What was it?
Potato mold.
Potato mold, like mold from an old potato in your pantry? How does that even work?
I know, it sounds absurd, but it's brilliant chemistry. Calcite formation requires specific conditions: moisture, acidity, and organic decay.
Okay.
So a forger can carve a statue out of authentic ancient dolomite, which they can source from an old quarry. Then they wrap the entire statue in potato mold and bury it.
And the mold does the work.
Yes, the highly acidic organic decay of the mold accelerates the chemical weathering process on the surface of the stone exponentially. What takes nature 2,000 years to achieve through wind and rain, an acidic mold environment can achieve in a matter of months.
So Dr. Margolis's machines weren't broken. They accurately detected calcite.
Exactly. The failure was in the interpretation of the data. The 14 months of rigorous, expensive, confident analysis was entirely catastrophically wrong.
Wow. And today, if you look in the Getty's catalog, the Kouros has a deeply humbling notation. It reads about 530 BC or modern forgery.
When those experts looked at the statue and felt that wave of intuitive repulsion, they were absolutely right.
Let's pause and really let that sink in, because the implication for our listeners is massive. In a 2-second glance, Evelyn Harrison and Thomas Hoving gathered more accurate, actionable information than an entire team of scientists and lawyers did in over a year.
Think about that. From the time we are in grade school, we are taught to be deeply suspicious of snap judgments.
Right. We are taught to demand proof, documentation, and rigorous logic.
But the takeaway here is that your immediate physical reactions to a pitch deck, a new executive hire, or a potential business partner are not just random, flighty emotions.
There are actually dense, highly complex data sets waiting to be decoded.
But that forces us to ask a really difficult question. How does that actually work mechanically? How can a feeling of coldness or a flip in your stomach possibly be smarter than a spreadsheet?
To understand the actual neurological mechanics of that, we have to step away from the world of ancient art and look at a famous experiment conducted by a team of scientists at the University of Iowa.
Oh, the Iowa gambling experiment. This is a great one.
It is. This experiment was specifically designed to measure exactly how our brains process complex, hidden information in high-stakes scenarios.
How did they set it up?
So imagine sitting down at a table in a sterile laboratory. In front of you are 4 decks of cards. 2 of the decks are red, and 2 of the decks are blue. The scientists tell you that you're playing a gambling game.
And what's the goal?
Your goal is simply to maximize your winnings by turning over cards one at a time from any of the 4 decks. Each card will either win you a certain amount of money or cost you a certain amount of money.
Okay, so I'm sitting there flipping cards. Seems simple enough. I pull a card, I get a reward or a penalty.
It seems simple, but there is a hidden underlying rule to the game that you are not told about. The red decks are essentially a financial minefield.
How so?
They offer very high initial rewards. Maybe you pull a card and win $100 right away. But the penalties attached to the red decks are catastrophic.
So if you keep pulling from the red decks.
Those massive hidden penalties will eventually bankrupt you. The only way to win the game, or even survive it, is to figure out the underlying pattern. You must strictly pull from the blue decks.
Because the blue decks are safer.
Right. They offer modest, steady payouts and very small, manageable penalties. The scientists wanted to know one specific thing. How long does it take a normal human being to figure out this hidden pattern?
So I'm playing the game. I pull a red card. I win big. I pull another red. Suddenly I lose $500. I pull a blue. I win $10. I pull another blue. I lose $2. Over time, I have to figure out the math.
Precisely. And the researchers carefully tracked the timeline of how people figured this out. What they found was a very consistent progression.
What did the timeline look like?
After turning over about 50 cards in total, most participants will start to develop a hunch. They can't fully explain the math yet, but if you ask them, they will tell you they just have a feeling they should start preferring the blue decks.
And then they keep playing.
Yeah, and after about 80 cards, the conscious mind fully catches up to the pattern. At card 80, the participants have figured out the game entirely. They can clearly, logically, and mathematically explain exactly why the red decks are dangerous and the blue decks are safe.
And that timeline makes total sense to me. That is exactly how we assume all learning works. We gather experience, we think it through, we formulate a hypothesis, and we reach a logical conclusion.
Right. It takes 80 cards to gather enough data to get to the truth.
But if the experiment stopped there, it would just confirm everything we already believe about rational decision-making.
Exactly. But the Iowa scientists didn't just ask the participants questions. They were measuring their physical bodies the entire time.
How are they measuring them?
They hooked the gamblers up to a polygraph-like machine that specifically measured the activity of the eccrine sweat glands just below the skin in the palms of their hands.
Wait, why the sweat glands on the palms?
Because the sweat glands on your palms and soles are directly wired to the sympathetic nervous system. This is your primal fight-or-flight network.
Oh, interesting.
When you encounter stress, danger, or intense cognitive load, your sympathetic nervous system activates. It slightly increases the moisture on your palms. It's actually an evolutionary adaptation designed to give you a better grip if you need to run away or fight.
Huh, I never knew that.
Yeah, and this slight increase in moisture drastically changes the electrical conductance of your skin, which the machine can measure perfectly. It is an unfiltered window into the brain's threat detection system.
Okay, so they are tracking the conscious answers, but they are also tracking the hidden stress response in the body. What did the machine find?
The machine revealed something absolutely astonishing. Remember the timeline.
Yeah.
Participants could articulate the rules at card 80, and they felt a conscious hunch at card 50.
Right.
But long before any of that happened, their bodies were already reacting. By the 10th card, just 10 cards into the game, their palms started sweating significantly whenever their hand even reached toward the red decks.
Just 10 cards. Let me make sure I'm following this. At card 10, the conscious mind has absolutely no idea what is going on.
None at all.
If you ask the person why they were pulling a card, they would just say they were guessing.
Ah.
But their hands are actively sweating because they are reaching for danger.
Exactly.
Where is that information living in the gap between card 10 and card 80?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. The brain figured out the pattern of danger at card 10. It recognized the hidden mathematical threat, but it couldn't instantly translate that complex pattern recognition into conscious language.
Because language and logical articulation take time and processing power.
Right. So the brain bypassed the conscious mind entirely and sent a distress signal directly to the nervous system. Danger, sweat, avoid.
That is wild.
And here is the most incredible part. Not only were their hands sweating at card 10, but their actual behavior began to change. Right around that 10th card, as that physical stress response kicked in, participants unconsciously started favoring the blue cards and taking fewer from the red decks.
So they figured out the game and started acting on that knowledge long before they realized they had figured out the game.
Okay, this completely changes the paradigm. The implications for how we operate in the business world are staggering.
It really challenges everything we're taught. We are taught that our conscious mind is the captain of the ship.
But this shows the brain figures out the pattern and spots the danger long before the conscious speaking part of the mind can formulate the words.
Imagine you are interviewing a candidate for a crucial C-suite role in your company. You have their resume right in front of you. It is flawless.
They went to the exact right schools, They have a decade of perfect experience.
Exactly. Their references are glowing. Logically, this is the 80 card mark. They're the perfect hire. Every piece of empirical data says, hire this person.
Right.
But as you are sitting across from them, just listening to them answer your questions, your stomach does a little flip, or the hair on the back of your neck stands up, or you just feel a strange tightness in your chest.
That is your 10-card sweat response.
Yes. We are trained in corporate culture to dismiss that physical response as completely irrational. We tell ourselves, don't be silly, look at this resume, don't let your weird feelings ruin a good hire.
But this experiment tells us the exact opposite. That physical feeling isn't irrational at all.
No, it is your brain furiously processing a hidden pattern of danger. Maybe a microexpression of arrogance, a subtle inconsistency in their story, or a tiny aggressive posture that your conscious mind just hasn't caught up to yet.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, it explains exactly, mechanically, what happened to the art experts at the Getty Museum.
It does. Evelyn Harrison and Thomas Hoving didn't weigh every conceivable strand of evidence. They didn't have the time or the ability to run an isotopic analysis in their heads.
They considered only what could be gathered in a single fleeting glance.
And in that glance, a specific part of their brain did a series of instant, impossibly complex calculations. Before any conscious thought could take place, their brains recognized a catastrophic pattern mismatch.
And because they couldn't instantly voice it, their brains sent physical signals. They felt intuitive repulsion. They felt a physical sense of coldness.
The completely inappropriate word fresh popped into Hoving's conscious mind as a warning label. They didn't immediately know why they knew, but their 10-card sweat response was screaming at them.
Which brings us to the actual biological mechanism behind this. We're talking about a very specific part of the brain that psychologists call the adaptive unconscious.
Yes, the adaptive unconscious.
Now, I want to clarify this right away because when most of us hear the word unconscious, we immediately picture a Victorian couch, a cigar, and Sigmund Freud talking about our repressed childhood memories.
Right, the dark, murky desires hidden in the basement of our minds.
But that is not what Gladwell is talking about here, right?
Not at all. We have to completely separate this from the Freudian concept. The adaptive unconscious is not a dark basement of repressed urges. It is a highly efficient, incredibly sophisticated internal supercomputer.
And what's its dedicated job?
Its dedicated job is to quickly and quietly process the massive, overwhelming amounts of data we need to keep functioning and surviving as human beings on a second-by-second basis.
So it's about survival.
Think about it from a purely evolutionary perspective. When you are walking down the street, step off the curb, and suddenly, out of the corner of your eye, realize a massive delivery truck is bearing down on you, what happens?
You definitely don't stop to consciously evaluate the speed of the truck.
Exactly. You don't calculate its trajectory based on physics, review the friction of your shoes on the asphalt, and logically deduce your most optimal escape route.
If you relied on your conscious, deliberate 80-card mind in that moment, you would be crushed. You just jump back. You don't think, you don't calculate, you just act.
Exactly. We survived as a species because we developed this secondary decision-making apparatus capable of making very quick, highly accurate judgments based on very thin slices of information.
That makes a lot of sense.
The psychologist Timothy D. Wilson uses a brilliant analogy. He compares the adaptive unconscious to a modern commercial jetliner. A jetliner can fly on autopilot, with little or no input from the human conscious pilot.
But autopilot isn't just, like, coasting?
No, the autopilot system is constantly, furiously reading radar, adjusting to wind shear, monitoring engine temperature, and changing the flaps by fractions of an inch every millisecond to keep the plane level.
So the adaptive unconscious is our internal autopilot.
It sizes up the world, warns us of danger, sets goals, and initiates complex action in an incredibly sophisticated manner. We constantly toggle back and forth between these two modes.
So if you sit down and decide to invite a coworker to dinner, that's conscious. You weigh the pros and cons, you check your calendar.
But if you spontaneously get into a heated argument with that same coworker over a minor issue,
That reaction is often driven unconsciously, motivated by a completely different, much faster part of your brain evaluating tone of voice and posture. That makes sense, but how good is this autopilot, really? Jumping out of the way of a truck is one thing, that's just basic survival. But can this rapid-fire unconscious system actually handle complex subjective judgments? Like evaluating human character?
it excels at it. To prove this, Gladwell highlights a fascinating study by the psychologist Nalini Ambady.
What did she do?
She wanted to test the exact limits of how fast and how accurately this autopilot works in a complex social setting. She decided to study how college students evaluate the effectiveness of their professors.
Now, normally evaluating a teacher takes a whole semester of attending lectures, reading the syllabus, and taking exams.
Right. But Embody took silent 10-second video clips of a professor teaching. No sound, just 10 seconds of video.
Just 10 seconds.
She showed these clips to students who had never met the professor and asked them to rate the teacher's effectiveness based purely on that tiny sliver of observation.
With no sound. How could they possibly judge a teacher without hearing a single word they said?
That's exactly what other researchers wondered. But the students had no problem rating the teachers. So Embody pushed the envelope. She cut the clips down to 5 seconds.
And they could still do it.
The ratings remained remarkably consistent. Then she cut the clicks down to just 2 seconds of silent video. Think about how fast 2 seconds is. It is a literal glance.
Oh.
And yet the snap judgments those students made based on 2 seconds of silent video were remarkably consistent with the formal end-of-year evaluations made by students who had sat in that professor's classroom for an entire semester.
Wait, really? The students who watched a 2-second silent clip came to the same conclusion as the students who spent months in the class. That is wild.
That is the raw, unadulterated power of the adaptive unconscious. In 2 seconds of watching a silent video, the human brain can process microexpressions, body language, posture, hand gestures, and subtle confidence levels.
It compiles all of that hidden data and arrives at a highly accurate conclusion about a person's underlying competence.
But here's the rub. Society constantly tells us to distrust this system. We are bombarded with idioms like, haste makes waste, look before you leap, and don't judge a book by its cover.
We demand that decisions be sourced, footnoted, and backed by a 14-month investigation.
But what Ambody's research, the Iowa Gambling Task, and the Getty Koros all unequivocally show is that we need to give ourselves permission to trust rapid cognition.
Especially in high-stress, fast-moving environments, which perfectly describes the modern business and startup landscape. Exhaustive deliberation isn't just slow, it can actually become a liability. When things move fast, your conscious mind is the bottleneck.
Exactly.
Okay, I hear you, and this all sounds incredible. But let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If the adaptive unconscious is this infallible supercomputer that can evaluate a complex situation in 2 seconds, what does this all mean for us practically? Should we just throw out all our spreadsheets, fire the data analysts, burn our business plans, and run our companies purely on vibes and 2-second glances?
I mean, if my 10-card sweat response is always right, why do I ever bother doing the math?
Right.
That is the danger of taking this concept to the extreme, and it is a crucial point to clarify. Absolutely not. You should not throw out the spreadsheets.
Okay, good. Cool.
The adaptive unconscious is incredibly powerful, but it is deeply, profoundly fallible. It is not a magical crystal ball that always tells the truth.
It's still just a biological computer.
And like any computer, it can be thrown off, distracted, fed bad data, or completely disabled by user error. This is the flip side of the coin.
If rapid cognition is so brilliant, we have to ask, why did the experts working for the Getty Museum spend 14 months meticulously analyzing a fake statue without ever once feeling that intuitive repulsion?
That's a great point. The Getty scientists and curators were standing in the exact same room looking at the exact same statue as Evelyn Harrison. They had eyes. Why didn't their palms sweat? Why didn't they feel a sense of coldness?
Because their instincts were actively thwarted by competing interests. Their internal computer was jammed.
You have to look at the historical context of the Getty in 1983. They were a relatively young museum. Thanks to J. Paul Getty's endowment, they were incredibly well-funded, arguably the richest museum in the world, but they lacked prestige.
They were desperate to build a world-class collection that could rival ancient institutions like the Met in New York or the Louvre in Paris.
When the Koros appeared, it wasn't just a statue. It was a shortcut to global legitimacy. It was the find of a century. It was exactly precisely what they wanted to find.
So they were blinded by their intense desire for the statue to be real. And they were so comforted by the initial scientific data that seemed to confirm what they already desperately wanted to believe.
They effectively shut down the adaptive unconscious. Their rational mind completely overrode their intuitive mind because of a massive emotional vulnerability, desperation.
It's like they wanted to believe it so badly that they turned off the alarm system. There's another story in the chapter that highlights this perfectly, right? The art historian George Ortiz going to see a collection owned by Ernst Langlotz.
Yes, and it perfectly illustrates how expertise alone isn't enough if the emotional state is compromised. Ernst Langlotz was one of the world's absolute foremost experts on archaic Greek sculpture, a true titan in the field.
And George Ortiz, a younger but highly skilled historian, goes to Langlotz's home to see a prized bronze statuette that Langlotz owns.
Right. Ortiz takes one look at this bronze and instantly sees it's a fake. His adaptive unconscious fires immediately. The statue is full of contradictory, slipshod elements that don't belong together.
So Ortiz is standing there, dumbfounded, asking himself, how could Langlotz, a man who literally wrote the textbooks on Greek statues, be fooled by such a clumsy, obvious forgery?
And the answer isn't that Langlotz lost his expertise, right?
Exactly. The answer reveals the true Achilles heel of our instincts. Langlotz had bought that specific bronze sculpture when he was a very young man, long before he had acquired his formidable expertise.
He had fallen in love with it. It was his first major purchase, his first great love in the art world.
And because of that intense, foundational emotional attachment, he was completely unable to objectively question his initial assessment, even as he spent decades gaining the precise knowledge that should have instantly exposed the fake.
His deep emotional bond effectively locked the door to his adaptive unconscious. He couldn't see the truth because his heart wouldn't let his brain process the data.
This right here is a huge, flashing warning sign for anyone making decisions in the real world. Your instincts are powerful, but they can be entirely thrown off by your own emotional state.
If you're a startup founder desperate to close a funding round just to keep the lights on and make payroll, you cannot blindly trust your blank when evaluating a shady term sheet from a predatory investor.
Because your sheer desperation to survive will silence the warning bells in your head. You will read a terrible contract and convince yourself it's a great deal because you need it to be.
Or if you are overly emotionally attached to a legacy project, maybe a product you designed 10 years ago that is now steadily draining company resources, your gut instinct about its viability is going to be heavily compromised by your nostalgia and your ego.
You have to constantly rigorously audit your own state of mind before trusting your gut. You have to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I feeling a genuine, objective, intuitive response to the facts in front of me? Or am I just feeling the loud, messy echo of my own desires, fears, and anxieties?
That is a brilliant synthesis. And it leads us directly to the path forward. If our instincts are incredibly powerful but also vulnerable and fallible, how do we use them effectively without being led astray?
The third and arguably most important task of understanding rapid cognition is realizing that it is not a magical psychic gift bestowed upon a lucky few at birth.
Right. Evelyn Harrison and Thomas Hoving did not have superpowers. When they looked at the corals and felt that coldness, their 2-second glance was fueled by a lifetime of studying, touching, analyzing, and living with antiquities.
They had spent decades meticulously loading their adaptive unconscious with extremely high-quality data.
Right. It reminds me of a specific detail Hoving mentions about his early days at the Met. He didn't just walk into a museum one day and declare himself an expert.
He talks about spending evening after evening in the dusty storerooms with a senior European curator. They would stay until 10 o'clock at night, long after everyone else had gone home.
They would take thousands of objects out of their display cases, put them on tables, and just physically pore over them. They would touch the marble, feel the weight of the bronze, trace the tool marks.
He wasn't just casually glancing at things. He was systematically building a massive, highly detailed internal database. What is he actually doing to his brain during those long nights in the storeroom?
From a neurological perspective, he was physically altering the structure of his brain. He was building and strengthening neural pathways. Every time he analyzed a genuine piece of ancient art, he was laying down myelin.
Myelin, that's the insulation around nerve fibers that increases the speed and efficiency of electrical signals in the brain, right?
Exactly. He was painstakingly teaching his unconscious mind how to instantly match the physical feeling, the texture, and the subtle visual cues of an object with its formal style, its historical background, and its ultimate authenticity.
So, just as we can teach ourselves to consciously think logically and deliberately, like taking classes on how to read a corporate balance sheet or how to write complex Python code, we can also actively teach ourselves to make better snap judgments.
If you want to have brilliant, razor-sharp gut instincts in your specific industry, you cannot just rely on naive intuition. You can't just walk in on day one and trust your gut.
You have to do the reps.
Yeah.
You have to aggressively immerse yourself in the material until the underlying patterns become second nature. You educate your unconscious the exact same way you educate your conscious mind, through rigorous, focused, high-volume experience.
Exactly. I think that is the most empowering, practical part of this entire concept. We tend to view intuition as this mystical, ethereal force, like you either have it or you don't.
But what Gladwell is showing us through these art experts is that intuition is just rapid pattern recognition. And you have absolute control over what patterns your brain is exposed to.
If you are an entrepreneur, you educate your unconscious by talking to hundreds of actual customers, not just reading market reports. You study every single failure in your specific market. You immerse yourself in the daily, messy friction of your industry.
And when you do that deliberately over time, your 10-card sweat response becomes incredibly highly calibrated. You will start instinctively rejecting bad partnership deals or pivoting away from failing marketing strategies long before your conscious mind even has time to build a spreadsheet explaining why.
Your body will know before your brain can speak.
If we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the soul of this chapter, and really the thesis for how we should approach decision-making moving forward, is the realization that the human mind operates on two very distinct parallel tracks.
For centuries, our culture, our schools, and our corporate structures have taught us to worship the slow, deliberate, data-heavy track.
We celebrate the 14 months of mass spectrometry, the endless legal paperwork, and the massive focus groups. But the profound truth revealed by the Getty Koros is that there can be as much immense value and sometimes significantly more accuracy in the rapid blink of an eye as in months of rational analysis.
The true master of their craft, whether they are an art historian authenticating a priceless statue, a CEO navigating a hostile merger, or a young founder pivoting a startup, is the person who understands how to leverage both tracks harmoniously.
It is the leader who respects their internal computer enough to listen to it when it signals danger, but who also has the fierce discipline, the self-awareness, and the humility to continuously, rigorously educate that computer with good data.
You have to feed the autopilot good data if you want it to safely fly the plane through a storm. But that brings us to the edge of our current understanding.
Now that we know how unbelievably powerful that first 2-second glance can be, and how it can successfully override months of microscopic analysis, we have to ask the next logical, practical question.
How do we actively decode the specific patterns our brains are picking up? When someone walks into a room for a pitch meeting, what exact granular slivers of information is our adaptive unconscious latching onto to make those instant judgments?
We will uncover exactly how to do that and how to harness that power in our next deep dive into the fascinating concept called the theory of thin slices.
I cannot wait to get into that. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
We've spent this entire time talking about how you can educate your mind to use rapid cognition to read situations and make better, faster decisions. But remember, this dynamic goes both ways.
It absolutely does. And this is the thought I want to leave you with. If our unconscious is constantly, furiously processing thin slices of data to form instant, highly accurate judgments about the world around us, what kind of unseen data are you inadvertently broadcasting to the adaptive unconscious of everyone you meet today?
So what if I told you that someone could watch you and your partner talk about a dog for just 3 minutes and predict with up to 90% accuracy whether your marriage is headed for divorce?
I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds completely insane.
Right, it sounds like a parlor trick.
Yeah.
But I want you, the listener, to truly visualize that for a second. Just 3 minutes, that's 180 seconds.
It's literally nothing.
Exactly. You sit down, you bicker about, like, who is going to walk the golden retriever or whether the new puppy is chewing the furniture.
Just a totally normal Tuesday afternoon?
Yeah, and meanwhile, an observer is sitting behind a monitor watching this incredibly brief, seemingly trivial interaction, and they just casually predict the ultimate fate of the most complex, profound relationship of your entire life.
Yeah, it really does upend everything we think we know about relationships.
It totally does. Because a marriage spans decades, you know? It encompasses these massive life events. Financial crises, raising children, career changes, illnesses.
The heavy stuff.
Right, the heavy stuff. So how on earth could a microscopic fraction of a random afternoon contain enough data to forecast the next 15 years of your life? At first glance, it feels impossible.
It does feel impossible, but it is actually pure, rigorous science. And that's what today's deep dive is exploring. We are looking at a concept called the theory of thin slices.
Thin slices. I love that term.
It's a great term. Our mission today is to uncover the mechanics of how the human unconscious operates. We're going to see how our brains are remarkably adept at finding these profound, reliable patterns in situations based on just incredibly narrow or thin slices of experience.
And I want to make sure the listener knows right up front, the reason this matters goes way beyond just marriage counseling.
No, absolutely. It goes far beyond that.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who is navigating the worlds of business, entrepreneurship, or management, understanding how to thin slice is basically the ultimate strategic advantage.
It's like a superpower for the business world.
Exactly. It's the key to reading clients, hiring the right executive team, and, cutting through the massive information overload of our modern world to make brilliant decisions on the fly.
Okay, so let's get into it. We have to start with the architect of these impossible predictions, a psychologist named John Gottman.
Right, the famous Love Lab.
Yes, the Love Lab at the University of Washington. And what strikes me about this lab is the physical setup. It contrasts so sharply with the emotional weight of what's actually happening inside.
Yeah, you picture this warm, inviting therapist's office with soft lighting and a couch.
Right, like maybe some nice herbal tea or something.
Yeah.
But the reality is way more clinical. It's on the second floor of this completely nondescript building. You walk in, and it looks like a slightly sterile television studio.
With the 2 office chairs.
Yeah. 2 office chairs mounted on raised platforms, positioned exactly 5 feet apart. So the couple walks in, and they don't just sit down. They were literally wired into a mainframe.
They hook them up with electrodes and sensors.
Clipped right to their fingers and their ears. And these sensors aren't tracking, like, subjective emotion. They are tracking physiological data in real time. Heart rate, sweat production, skin temperature.
And don't forget the gigolometer.
The gigolometer. I mean, what a name. Underneath their chairs, there's this mechanism the lab actually calls a gigolometer, which measures every single shift, twitch, and nervous bounce in their seats.
So they have all this physiological data, and then they add the visual.
Right. 2 video cameras. One pointed squarely at the husband's face, the other at the wife's face, recording every tiny micro-expression. And the instructions they get are so incredibly simple.
Just sit there for 15 minutes and discuss a point of contention.
Exactly. Discuss a topic from your marriage that you disagree on. So to understand how Gottman extracts meaning from this, let's look at a specific couple from his research.
Yeah, let's talk about Bill and Sue.
Bill and Sue. They are the perfect baseline because they are so incredibly normal. The source material paints this very vivid picture of them.
They're in their 20s, blonde, blue-eyed, wearing these stylishly tousled haircuts and funky glasses.
Like, if you met them at a dinner party, you would instantly like them.
Yeah.
Bill has this endearingly playful, almost boyish manner.
Yeah.
And Sue has this very sharp, deadpan wit.
And their massive point of contention for this recording, they live in a small apartment and just got a very large puppet.
Puppy. It's such a cliche. Bill is, as he puts it, just not a dog person.
Yeah.
He is complaining about the dog while Sue defends the dog.
And it's so mild. At times, they almost seem to forget they were supposed to be arguing at all.
Right. They fall into this banter about whether the dog is smelly. Bill says she is, and Sue deadpans. This is the direct quote. She says, "I petted her, and my hands didn't stink or feel oily. Your hands have never smelled oily."
And Bill just replies, "Yes, sir, she's a dog."
And Sue counters with, "Don't call my dog oily, boy." And they're half smiling while they say this. There's no screaming, no crying, no throwing chairs.
It looks like the most mundane, average conversation 2 people could possibly have.
Okay, but hold on. I really have to push back here, because I'm sure the listener's thinking the same thing.
Hit it for it.
You are telling me a 15-minute spat over an oily dog represents an entire marriage. I mean, marriages are incredibly dynamic.
They are.
They're about money, kids, jobs, the in-laws, existential crises. People have good days and bad days. Maybe Bill just had a terrible commute in Seattle traffic. Or Sue had a frustrating morning at work.
So they're just a little snippy.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe they just had a great lunch and are in a fantastic mood. How is this brief slice not just a completely random sample of a passing mood? How can you extrapolate a lifelong partnership from a puppy debate?
That skepticism is totally natural. It really is, because we are conditioned to view relationships chronologically, right, as this long timeline of events.
Right.
But Gottman's revolutionary insight is that marriages operate on something we can call marital DNA.
Marital DNA.
Yeah. What his research proves is that marriages are not just random collections of good and bad days. Every relationship has a distinctive underlying structural pattern that governs how those 2 specific people interact.
Okay.
And here is the crucial mechanism. That pattern surfaces in any meaningful interaction regardless of the topic.
So topic literally doesn't matter.
Not at all. When Bill and Sue are arguing about the dog, they aren't actually communicating about a dog. They are executing their ingrained conflict resolution protocol.
Wow, okay.
Gottman isn't analyzing their pet preferences. He is analyzing the structural integrity of their communication. And to decode this invisible structure, he uses a mathematical framework called the SEAF coding system.
Right, SPAFF. It stands for specific affect.
Exactly. And it is essentially a rigorous second-by-second translation of human emotion into quantifiable data.
And the sheer volume of data this system generates is just staggering to me. SPAFF doesn't just categorize people as happy or mad.
Right.
The system has 20 separate, highly specific categories.
It covers the entire spectrum of emotion.
Yeah. For instance, disgust is coded as a 1, contempt is a 2, anger is 7, defensiveness is 10, whining is 11, sadness is 12, stonewalling is 13, neutral is 14.
So the researchers in the lab take this videotape and they go through it second by second.
Literally second by second. They assign a numerical value to both the husband and the wife for every single second of the interaction.
So let's do the math on that. A 15-minute conversation is 900 seconds long.
Right.
That means Gottman is extracting 900 emotional data points for Bill and 900 for Sue. That's 1,800 numbers from one short chat about a puppy.
1,800 numbers. And then you combine those 1,800 emotional data points with the physiological data.
The heart rate spikes, the sweat production, the jiggling meter data.
Yeah, and he runs all of this through massive complex algorithms. And the predictive power of this math is just phenomenal.
It really is.
If he analyzes a full hour of conversation, he can predict divorce with 95% accuracy. If he drops it to 15 minutes, it's 90%.
And then it gets even crazier. A researcher in his lab, Sybil Carrere, discovered that even if you shrink that window down to just 3 minutes, the prediction remains highly accurate.
3 minutes. It's just wild. So let's apply that SPAFF coding to Bill and Sue. Let's see what the math actually reveals behind the smiles.
Yeah, so when a trained SPAF coder like Amber Tabares from Gottman's lab watches that tape, a completely different narrative emerges.
Because to the untrained eye, Bill seems like a reasonable, nice guy, right? He's just trying to explain that he doesn't want a makeshift fence in their living room.
Right, but Tabares points out that Bill is constantly relentlessly engaging in yes-but tactics.
The yes but.
Yeah, he will say something like, yeah, I know I'm getting way better, I just don't want to have a dog.
So he appears to agree, creating the illusion of compromise, but immediately takes it back to protect his own position.
Exactly. In the language of SPAFF, he is being highly defensive.
Yeah.
In fact, he was coded as defensive for 40 of the first 66 seconds of the video.
40 out of 66 seconds? That's huge.
And meanwhile, while Bill is talking, Sue rolls her eyes.
Just a quick micro expression, right?
Yeah, it's incredibly quick, but it's captured on the camera. Eye rolling is a classic, undeniable physiological sign of contempt.
Ouch.
Furthermore, Tabares analyzes the concept of validation. In a structurally sound marriage, when one partner asks for credit, like Bill saying, I'm getting way better, you've got to admit it, the other partner gives it.
Right. They nod, they say, uh-huh. They validate the effort, even if they disagree on the broader point.
But throughout the entire session, Sue does not validate Bill a single time. Not once.
Wow. So on the surface, they seem fine. They even found the video hilarious when they watched it back together.
But the underlying DNA of the interaction, the math, is toxic. Sue is completely inflexible and contemptuous, and Bill is perpetually defensive.
Okay, I want to translate this immediately for the listener.
Yeah.
Because the practical application here for the business world is absolute gold.
Oh, tough.
Think about high-stakes business negotiations, or evaluating a potential co-founder, or hiring a new C-suite executive. We often operate under the assumption that we need months or even years of working alongside someone to truly understand their dynamic.
We think we need to see them under pressure.
Exactly. But Gottman's math suggests that you don't. People's conflict resolution styles, their inflexibility, their defensiveness, these traits don't magically materialize only during a board-level crisis.
No, they are deeply embedded in their everyday casual interactions.
Right. So if you are interviewing a potential co-founder and they roll their eyes when you mention a minor scheduling issue, or if they use a yes-but tactic when discussing where to get coffee, that is their operational DNA leaking out.
You have to pay attention to the micro-interactions.
You really do. Because the way they argue about the proverbial dog is the exact same architectural structure they will use when you are arguing about Series B funding.
That is a perfect parallel. And, if Gottman can see this invisible structural signature in a marriage, it begs the question, do we leave the same invisible signature in other parts of our lives?
And spoiler alert, we do.
We absolutely do. And the military actually figured this out decades before psychologists did. To truly grasp how these patterns remain so stable, we need to look at a fascinating historical example from the world of Morse code.
Yeah, going back to the Second World War.
Right. So the British military assembled thousands of interceptors, mostly women, whose sole job was to sit in listening stations and tune in to the radio broadcasts of the German military.
And the Germans were transmitting in these highly complex encrypted codes, like the Enigma machine.
Exactly. So for a long time, the British couldn't understand a single word of the actual text being transmitted.
But it turned out they didn't necessarily need to decipher the message to gather incredibly valuable intelligence.
Because of something called a fist.
A fist. This is where the mechanics of human behavior become so interesting to me, because Morse code is literally just dots and dashes.
Right. On paper, it seems completely uniform and mechanical.
But humans are not machines. When a human operator is physically tapping out a message on those old manual machines, they never replicate the prescribed lengths of the dots and dashes perfectly.
They vary the spacing slightly.
Yeah, they stretch certain characters, they develop a unique rhythmic cadence, and in the world of telegraphy, this unique cadence is called a fist. It is exactly like a vocal accent or a fingerprint, but for tapping keys.
So the British interceptors listened for hours and hours, day after day, and they started to recognize the individual fists of the German operators.
They actually gave them names, right?
They did. They would hear a transmission and say, oh, that's Oscar on the key.
And the strategic value of identifying that fist was just immense. I mean, if you know exactly what Oscar sounds like, and military intelligence tells you that Oscar is assigned to a specific Luftwaffe bomber squadron.
You can track that entire military unit's movements across the European theater simply by listening for his rhythm.
Exactly. If Oscar was transmitting from a base outside Florence last week, and today you hear his distinct fist transmitting from a station near Linz, you instantly know that unit has moved.
Without breaking a single encrypted line of code.
Without knowing what they were saying at all. The British could build a highly accurate diagram of the enemy's order of battle based entirely on recognizing a tapping rhythm.
And the most crucial thing about a fist is that it is completely unconscious.
Right.
Radio operators aren't sitting there trying to sound distinctive. They're just trying to send a military directive as efficiently as possible.
But their personality, their motor skills, their underlying neurological wiring just leaks into the keys?
It happens automatically, bypassing their conscious control. And this directly connects to what Gottman is measuring in the Love Lab.
Because Bill and Sue aren't trying to show the researchers that they are defensive.
Exactly. Their relationship has a fist. It has a natural automatic signature that expresses itself whether they are aware of it or not.
Wow, okay, so how does this tie into how they interpret each other?
Well, Gottman takes this concept of the relationship fist even further by introducing the psychological mechanism behind it. He calls it sentiment override.
It's sentiment override.
Yeah, it's the underlying cognitive state that governs how a couple interprets each other's actions. It's the filter through which all data passes. And every relationship tends to fall into one of two stable states.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is positive sentiment override. In this state, positive emotion acts as a psychological buffer. If your partner does something irritable, clumsy, or objectively bad, your brain unconsciously overrides the negative action with a positive assumption.
Like, oh, they must be stressed about work.
Right, or they didn't sleep well. The baseline assumption of your cognitive filter is that your partner is a good person having a momentary situational lapse.
That sounds like a healthy place to be.
Yeah.
But the dark side of that cognitive filter is negative sentiment override, right?
Yeah. In this state, the buffer is completely gone. The baseline assumption of the brain is hostility.
So even a relatively neutral statement is perceived as a personal attack or a manipulation.
Exactly. And if your partner actually does something genuinely positive, you view it with intense suspicion. You think, what do they want from me? Why are they acting nice all of a sudden?
Gottman uses this brilliant example to illustrate how this alters reality. Imagine a spouse is trying to talk, gets frustrated, and says, "Will you shut up and let me finish?"
It's a harsh phrase.
It is. But if the couple is entrenched in positive sentiment override, the other partner might not be thrilled about the aggressive phrasing, but they recognize it as a clumsy, desperate attempt to repair the flow of the conversation.
They might pause and say, sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. But if that exact same phrase, will you shut up and let me finish, is spoken in a state of negative sentiment override, it is a declaration of war.
The physiological response is instant.
The response is going to be, to hell with you, you're such a jerk, you remind me of your father. It is the exact same sequence of words, the exact same encrypted code, but an entirely different fist.
And once a partnership slips into negative sentiment override, Gottman's data shows that it is incredibly difficult to course correct. The trajectory is set because the filter alters all incoming data to confirm the negative bias.
So translating this to the professional realm for our listeners, every person you deal with has a fist, and every dynamic has a sentiment override.
Every client, every competitor, every employee.
Yes. If you have a client who has slipped into negative sentiment override regarding your company, no amount of standard customer service or polite emails is going to fix it.
Because they're filtering every communication through a lens of hostility.
Exactly. Recognizing these stable patterns allows you to predict their behavior even when the context completely changes. You don't need to read the encrypted code of what they're saying in the email. You just need to listen to the rhythm of how they're acting.
Right. But here's the catch. If relationships, clients, and people all have these underlying signatures, these fists, why aren't we all naturally as good at predicting outcomes as John Gottman?
Yeah, if the data's right there in front of us, why do we miss it?
This brings us to a massive flaw in how human beings process information. It turns out trying to thin slice a situation without a structured system is usually a disaster.
Oh, I love this part. The author of our source material actually tried to do Gottman's job.
He did. He got his hands on a tape containing 10 3-minute clips of different couples talking. Half of those couples eventually stayed together, and half got divorced.
So he watched the clips, tried to thin slice them using his intuition, and he got exactly 5 right.
A 50% success rate.
He would have been equally accurate just flipping a coin.
And he wasn't alone in this failure. Researchers gave this exact same tape to 200 marriage therapists, pastoral counselors, and clinical psychology students.
These are highly trained professionals. Their entire careers revolve around reading human behavior.
And their collective accuracy was only 53.8%, marginally better than a coin flip, but fundamentally terrible.
So why did they fail? The mechanics of why those professionals failed so spectacularly is deeply informative for anyone trying to make decisions in a complex environment.
They failed because their cognitive processing was utterly overwhelmed by data.
Right. When you watch a 3-minute video of 2 human beings arguing, there is an unimaginable amount of information hitting your brain. A fleeting smile, a scowl, a micro shift in tone, a sigh, a hesitation, a crossed arm.
The author described how he was frantically trying to keep track of all 20 emotional states on this AAF chart simultaneously. He was trying to calculate the ratio of positive to negative emotion in his head in real time.
Which is impossible.
Yeah.
And he couldn't even figure out what actually counted as positive or negative. Because as we saw with Bill and Sue's interaction, sometimes a smile is actually a yes but defensive tactic.
Exactly. The observers were drowning in information. They couldn't find the underlying pattern because they were deafened by the noise.
So how does Gottman succeed where 200 trained therapists fail?
He succeeds because he edits. He ruthlessly simplifies the equation. He doesn't try to track 20 emotions.
He realized that to find the fist, you only need to look for a few very specific signals.
Right. He calls them the 4 horsemen.
Defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and contempt.
He throws out all the other data. He ignores the sadness, the whining, the neutral chatter, the jokes. He just looks for the horsemen.
And even within those 4, there is one signal that stands above all others in its predictive power, right? If Gottman sees this one specific emotion, he considers it the single most important sign that a relationship is structurally doomed.
And that emotion is contempt.
We really need to dive deep into the psychology of contempt because I think it is often completely misunderstood. We casually use the words criticism and contempt interchangeably.
But neurologically and psychologically, they are miles apart. Let's break down the distinction. Why is contempt so much more destructive than criticism? Isn't a partner screaming and loudly criticizing you worse than them just silently rolling their eyes?
You would absolutely think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if my partner's yelling at me about leaving my dishes in the sink, that feels terrible. It elevates my heart rate.
But criticism, even loud, aggressive criticism, is fundamentally an attack on a specific action.
You didn't do the dishes. You are being lazy today. It is about what you did. Contempt, on the other hand, is a global condemnation of who you are.
It is an attack on your character.
Yes. When Sue rolled her eyes at Bill, or when someone sneers or uses a mocking, sarcastic tone, they are communicating disgust. They are placing themselves on a higher moral or intellectual plane, looking down on their partner.
Contempt implies inherent superiority.
Exactly. And Gottman's research shows that you cannot build or maintain a partnership, whether it's a marriage, a co-founding team, or a vendor relationship, if one person fundamentally believes they are superior to the other.
Contempt breaks down the absolute basic level of respect required for human connection.
And the physiological impact is just mind-blowing. Gottman actually found the presence of contempt in a marriage can predict how many infectious illnesses like colds the husband or wife will get over the next year.
Being subjected to contempt literally degrades the human immune system. It is that toxic.
Wow. So the practical takeaway for the entrepreneurial listener here is profound. When you are evaluating a complex situation, whether you're conducting due diligence on a new business acquisition, or analyzing a pivot, or interviewing a potential VP of sales,
your instinct, driven by anxiety, might be to gather as much data as humanly possible.
Right. You want to look at 50 different performance metrics, conduct a dozen rounds of interviews, analyze every macroeconomic trend.
But just like the therapist watching the video, you run the massive risk of being paralyzed by data. You will lose the signal in the static.
To be a successful, rapid decision maker, you have to find your four horsemen. You need to identify the one or two critical data points that actually drive success or failure in your specific context and brutally edit out the rest.
If you are hiring that VP of sales, maybe their technical knowledge of the specific CRM software doesn't actually matter. That's just noise.
Exactly. Maybe the only thing that matters is how they respond to a hostile, unexpected question during the interview. You are looking for their conflict resolution protocol.
Find the contempt. Find the deal killer. Simplify the data to find the signature.
Which flows directly into a fascinating paradox. If editing out data makes us more accurate, does that mean having access to less information can actually make us smarter?
It's a great question.
Let me set up a hypothetical scenario for you, the listener. Let's say you are a venture capitalist, and you are evaluating me. You are thinking of leading a Series A investment in my startup, and you need to understand my true personality.
You need to know if you're highly conscientious, emotionally stable, open to new ideas.
Exactly. And your partners give you two options for conducting your due diligence. Option A. You can spend a year getting lunch with me twice a week. We will hang out, talk about our lives, discuss business philosophy, and you will get to know me like a close friend.
That is the ultimate thick slice of data.
Right. Option B, you never meet me. Instead, you are allowed to spend exactly 15 minutes alone in my private office or my bedroom with a clipboard while I am not there. That is the thin slice. Which option gives you the most scientifically accurate assessment of my true personality?
Human intuition screams that you should pick option A.
Of course. A year of lunches. Hundreds of hours of deep conversation. How could 15 minutes in an empty room possibly compete with a year of interpersonal connection?
But a psychologist named Samuel Gosling actually ran this exact experiment. He took a group of college students and had their close friends, people who had spent massive amounts of thick slice time interacting with them, fill out a comprehensive personality questionnaire about them.
Okay.
Then, Gosling sent complete strangers, armed only with clipboards, into those same students' dorm rooms for 15 minutes.
And these strangers had never met the students.
Never met them. They just looked around, thin-sliced the environment, and filled out the exact same personality questionnaire.
And the results of this study completely dismantle how we think about evaluating people. The strangers, the people who spent a mere 15 minutes looking at an empty bedroom, were vastly more accurate at measuring certain core personality traits than the close friends.
It's incredible.
The strangers were significantly better at measuring conscientiousness, they were better at measuring emotional stability, and they were better at measuring openness to experience.
The close friends only won on traits like extroversion, which inherently requires social interaction to observe.
Right. But on the deep, internal, operational wiring of the person, the empty room told a much truer story than a year of friendship. I have to admit, when I first read this, it felt entirely counterintuitive. How does interacting with someone less give you more accurate information about who they really are?
It feels wrong because we overvalue interpersonal chemistry. It goes back to the concept of editing and noise.
Okay, say more about that.
When you meet someone face to face, you are immediately bombarded with confusing, irrelevant, and often manipulated information. Face to face interaction is very often a smokescreen.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Think about it. When you go to a high-stakes job interview or a pitch meeting, you are actively projecting a highly curated persona.
You want to appear hyper competent, charming, agreeable, and engaged.
You smile, you maintain perfect eye contact, you laugh at the partner's jokes. Your close friends or your business associates are constantly exposed to this projected, managed persona.
Furthermore, when we interact with people, our rapid cognition gets distracted by their physical appearance, the pitch of their voice, their innate charisma. All of this extra interpersonal data confuses the brain and obscures the underlying reality.
So the strangers in the dorm room had a massive advantage because they didn't have to deal with the smokescreen. They weren't charmed by a smile or distracted by a witty comment. They just had the raw, unfiltered data of the person's private space.
Exactly. And Gosling identified 3 specific types of clues that these strangers were picking up on, and they are brilliant.
Let's break those down.
First, their identity claims. These are deliberate expressions of how we want the world to see us.
So it's the framed Harvard diploma perfectly centered on the office wall, or the specific political poster on the dorm wall.
It's conscious branding. It tells you how the person wishes to be perceived.
Okay, what's the second one?
Second, and perhaps the most powerful metric, is behavioral residue.
Behavioral residue.
Yeah, these are the inadvertent, unconscious clues we leave behind simply as a byproduct of living and acting in a space.
It's the dirty laundry piled in the corner instead of the hand.
For the meticulously alphabetized CD collection, the way the reference books are stacked, or the fact that the trash can is overflowing with energy drink cans.
Behavioral residue is the physical manifestation of the fist. It is the exhaust fumes of your actual daily habits. You cannot fake behavioral residue easily because it requires a sustained, consistent effort that contradicts your actual nature.
Exactly. And third, Gosling pointed to thoughts and feelings regulators.
Regulators, what are those?
These are changes we make to our personal spaces specifically to affect our own internal mood. A scented candle placed on a desk, a specific ambient playlist queued up on the computer, artfully placed decorative pillows.
It shows how a person manages their emotional state when they are alone.
When you combine those 3 things, identity claims, behavioral residue, and emotional regulators, you are looking at a highly edited, highly concentrated distillation of a human being.
The strangers in the dorm room were doing exactly what John Gottman does with his mathematical editing. They were ignoring the noisy, confusing face-to-face data and zeroing in on the underlying structural signature.
So let's bring this back to that venture capital scenario.
Yes. When you are vetting a startup to invest millions of dollars in, or you are hiring a C-suite executive, do not just rely on the fact that they charmed you during a dinner meeting. Everyone is incredible charming when $1 million or a VP title is on the line.
Look for their behavioral residue.
Look at how they format the attachments in their follow-up emails. Are they meticulous or sloppy? Look at the physical state of their desk if you walk through their office. Look at how they treat the receptionist or the barista when they think no one of importance is evaluating them.
Because the thick slice of their polished resume and their interview persona is a smokescreen.
The thin slice of their inadvertent daily habits will tell you if they possess the actual conscientiousness and emotional stability required to scale a company.
We've talked about marriages failing, and we've talked about evaluating college students. But if we want to see the ultimate, highest stakes example of how powerful this kind of thin slicing can be, we need to apply it to a life or death scenario.
Okay.
Imagine you are an actuary working for a major medical insurance company, and your job is to predict which surgeons are most likely to be sued for medical malpractice.
The financial liability there is just massive.
It is. So your immediate logical instinct would be to dive into the thickest slice of data possible. You would want to examine where the doctors went to medical school, their board certifications, their peer reviews.
You would want to comb through years of their surgical records to see how many technical errors they have actually made in the operating room.
Right. But a psychologist named Nalini Ambady approached this problem entirely through the lens of thin slicing. She took audio takes of real surgeons talking to their patients during routine office visits.
These tapes were originally recorded by another researcher named Wendy Levinson, right?
Yes. And Ambady didn't listen to the whole consultation. She didn't listen to the medical advice. She took just 2 10-second clips of the doctor talking.
A total of 20 seconds of audio per doctor.
But she didn't stop there. She subjected these brief clips to a technical process called content filtering.
Okay, the mechanism of content filtering is crucial here. What happens when you run the audio through this filter is that it removes all the high-frequency sounds from the speech. The actual words become completely garbled and unintelligible.
You cannot understand a single medical term, you can't hear the diagnosis, you can't decipher the advice.
All that remains of the speech is the underlying pitch, the intonation, and the rhythm of the voice. It sounds exactly like the adults talking in an old Charlie Brown cartoon, just a muted wah-wah-wah.
So Embody then took these 40-second slices of pure, unintelligible garble and played them for a panel of judges. She asked the judges to rate the garbled voices on qualities like warmth, hostility, dominance, and anxiousness.
And based entirely on the judges' ratings of these muted sounds, Embody was able to predict with stunning accuracy which surgeons had been sued for malpractice and which ones had a clean record.
Let's really pause and break down the profound implication of what happened here. The judges knew absolutely nothing about the doctor's technical skill level.
They didn't know if the surgeon was a Harvard graduate or barely passed their boards. They didn't know how many lives they had saved.
He didn't even know what the doctors were saying to the patients in those clips. They solely and entirely judged the tone of the voice.
And the specific dichotomy they found in that tone is the crux of the entire phenomenon. It came down to a spectrum of dominance versus concern.
Dominance versus concern.
Yeah. If the garbled voice sounded dominant, authoritative, and condescending, that surgeon overwhelmingly fell into the group that got sued.
And if the voice sounded less dominant, warmer, and more concerned, they were in the non-sued group.
What this reveals is a shocking truth about human behavior. Medical malpractice lawsuits aren't actually just about surgical errors. They are about a fundamental lack of respect.
Yes.
When a patient sits in an office and feels they're being talked down to, when their unconscious brain registers that their doctor is dismissive or dominant, they lose interpersonal trust.
And when an error inevitably happens down the line, because medicine is a complex, imperfect science, the patient sues the arrogant doctor. They view the error as a manifestation of the doctor's lack of care.
Conversely, they do not sue the doctor who treated them with warmth and concern, even if that doctor made the exact same technical mistake.
It proves that the human unconscious is incredibly, almost terrifyingly adept at picking up on these underlying relational signatures, even when the explicit content, the actual words, is entirely stripped away.
Our brains are evolutionary machines, built to detect threat and safety in the tone of others.
And we see this ability to read the garble or the fist in many other highly specialized disciplines. In professional basketball, the great point guards have something called court sense.
Right? An instantaneous, unconscious comprehension of where every single player is moving on the floor without having to consciously map it out.
In the military, brilliant commanders possess what the French historically call coup d'oeil, or the power of the glance. It's the ability to instantly read the chaos of a battlefield and understand the strategic reality in a fraction of a second.
And in ornithology, expert bird watchers can identify a rare species in flight from 200 yards away in a microsecond by capturing what they call its gis.
Its general impression of size and shape, its essence. All of these are highly trained, context-specific forms of thin slicing.
So, bringing all of this back home to you, the listener, and your daily professional life. You might be the most technically gifted software engineer in your firm. You might be the most brilliant financial analyst or the most visionary CEO in your sector.
Your professional medical records might be utterly flawless.
But if your content filtered garble, the underlying tone of your voice, your micro-expressions, your baseline level of respect when you interact with your team or your clients reads as dominant, dismissive, or contemptuous, you are going to lose.
You are going to lose the client, you are going to lose the board's trust, and you're going to lose your top employees.
Because the people you interact with are thin slicing you every single day. They might not be able to articulate exactly why they don't trust you. They might just say they have a bad feeling.
But what has actually happened is that their unconscious brain has already mathematically coded your tone as dominant and filed you in the do not do business with category.
Which leads us perfectly into the synthesis of everything we've explored today. We've journeyed through the Love Lab's mathematical equations, the Morse code fists of WWII interceptors, the behavioral residue of college dorm rooms, and the garbled audio tapes of sued surgeons.
What is the unifying thread? What is the core truth of the theory of thin slices?
It is the realization that thin slicing is not magic. It is not a psychic parlor trick, and it certainly isn't intellectual laziness or stereotyping.
Thin slicing is an automated, vastly accelerated, unconscious version of exactly what John Gottman does with his video cameras, his physiological sensors, and his supercomputers.
The central memorable insight I want you to walk away with is this. Our unconscious mind is a master editor. When we are faced with a complex, high-stakes situation, our conscious, logical mind often gets bogged down.
It gets distracted by the charming smile in the job interview, the confusing arguments about the oily dog, or the impressive Harvard diploma on the wall. We drown in the noise.
But our unconscious mind is incredibly efficient at sifting through mountains of overwhelming information. It throws out the irrelevant distractions, it bypasses the social smokescreens, and it zeroes in on the true structural signature, the fist of a person or a situation.
It mathematically calculates the contempt hidden in a fleeting eye roll. It feels the dangerous dominance in a garbled tone of voice, and it reads the true operational conscientiousness in a perfectly aligned stack of books.
It is a deeply empowering realization. We all possess this internal supercomputer. We all have this evolutionary capacity for rapid cognition that can cut through the noise of the modern world and deliver brilliant, highly accurate insights in the blink of an eye.
If we learn to trust it, and more importantly, if we learn to curate the environments and the specific data we feed it by ignoring the thick slices of projected persona and focusing on the thin slices of behavioral residue, we can make vastly better, faster decisions in our businesses and our lives.
It is incredibly empowering. But it also leaves us with a massive lingering mystery. We've seen how brilliant our unconscious brain is at reading a room, decoding the structural integrity of a relationship, or sensing the danger in a business deal in just seconds.
But what happens when we are forced to pull that rapid unconscious process into the light?
Exactly. What happens when your boss, or your spouse, or your board of investors demands that you logically explain how you know what you know? What happens when we try to look behind the locked door of our own minds and verbally articulate the math of our thin-sliced insights?
That is the exact psychological tension we will dive into next time. On our next deep dive, we're going to explore the locked door and discover why trying to logically explain your brilliant snap judgments might actually be the fastest, most destructive way to completely ruin them.
What if the reasons, that you give for your most important life decisions are just completely made up?
I mean, it sounds deeply unsettling, right? Almost like a glitch in the matrix or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what if the real decisions, who you hire, what company you acquire, or even, honestly, who you marry, are being made entirely behind a locked door in your brain, and your conscious mind is just a PR agent spinning a plausible story after the fact?
Right, because we're so hardwired to believe we're the sovereign rulers of our own minds. But this isn't science fiction. It's the literal neurobiological reality of how our cognitive machinery processes the world.
So today, you're going to learn about the secret machinery of your snap decisions. We are taking a deep dive into the powerful, unconscious processes that dictate, well, everything.
Yeah.
From your physical posture in a hallway to how you evaluate a catastrophic business crisis.
And for anyone interested in entrepreneurship or leadership or just, human behavior, this matters deeply. Understanding this locked door of the mind is basically the ultimate competitive advantage.
It really is. It reveals how consumers actually behave, why traditional market research is completely, fundamentally flawed, and how true expertise really functions. So we're taking a deep dive into this hidden architecture of rapid cognition.
Yeah, and to really grasp the magnitude of this, we have to start by looking at a phenomenon that challenges our core belief in our own rationality.
Right, because we like to think that when we know something, we know exactly how we know it.
Exactly. But true, deeply ingrained expertise often functions in a way that just completely bypasses conscious awareness.
Which brings us to the fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying story of Vic Braden.
Oh, Vic Braden, such a perfect example.
Yeah, for those who don't follow the sport, Vic Braden was one of the greatest tennis coaches in the history of the game. I mean, he possessed a level of mastery over the biomechanics of tennis that was almost unparalleled.
Right, he knew the game inside and out.
But a few years ago, Braden noticed a really strange pattern in his own mind when he was watching professional matches.
And we have to remember, in tennis, a player gets 2 attempts to serve the ball into play.
Right. If they miss the first, it's a fault. If they miss the second, it's a double fault, and they lose the point. And at the professional level, a double fault is incredibly rare.
Oh, absolutely. These are elite athletes. Muscle memory is drilled into their bones. A player might double fault, 3 or 4 times in an entire 3-hour match?
Exactly. Yet Braden found that he could predict a double fault before the player's racket even touched the ball.
Which is wild. It's
Yeah.
vital to pause and consider the physics of what you just described. A professional tennis serve is, well, it's a kinetic explosion.
Yeah, there's so much going on.
It involves a highly synchronized chain of movements. You've got the precise height of the ball toss, the angle of the knee bend, the torque of the hips, the violent pronation of the wrist, and all of this happens in fractions of a second.
So to predict a failure in that system in real time seems impossible.
Totally impossible. But Braden wanted to test his own mind, so he went to the professional tournament at Indian Wells. It's this massive high-stakes event.
Right. And he just sat in the stands and quietly kept track, right?
Yeah. Over the course of the matches he watched, there were 17 double faults. And Braden correctly called 16 of them out loud before the ball was even struck.
16 out of 17. I mean, let's just do the math on that. If you were just randomly guessing when a rare event will happen in a match featuring hundreds of serves, the probability of hitting 16 out of 17 is infinitesimally small.
Right, it's not a guess.
It's not luck. He was pulling concrete data out of the ether. And to make it even more astonishing, he was doing this while watching Russian players he had never even met.
Yeah, players whose individual quirks and playing styles were completely unknown to him. That is the defining characteristic of this phenomenon. It isn't just familiarity with a specific person.
It's deeper than that.
Exactly. It is a deep structural recognition of a pattern. But the most interesting part of Braden's story isn't the parlor trick of predicting the serve. It's his psychological reaction to his own ability.
Because he wasn't celebrating.
Right. No, not at all. He was deeply disturbed by it. He described lying awake in bed at night in just agonizing frustration, trying to reverse engineer his own brain.
Like, trying to figure out how he knew?
Yeah, he would mentally replay the serves over and over. He'd wonder, was the player's toss half an inch too high? Did their trailing foot drag differently? Was the wrist angle off by a degree?
But he couldn't find the answer. The evidence he was using to make these remarkably accurate predictions was entirely inaccessible to him. It was just locked away, locked behind that door. And this isn't just an anomaly confined to the tennis court. We see the exact same neurological shortcut in the highest echelons of the art world.
Oh, precisely. The world of high-end art authentication is full of this. Thomas Having, the former director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, documented how the world's foremost art experts evaluate these newly discovered, supposedly ancient artifacts.
And their process is pretty strange, right?
It is. When these experts are presented with a potential forgery, their initial analysis isn't conscious. They don't immediately pull out a magnifying glass to check the chemical composition of the pigment.
Or like the specific direction of a brushstroke.
Right. Instead, they experience the sudden, overwhelming physical sensation, having actually called them the fake busters.
Fake busters. I love that.
Yeah. One expert described the feeling of spotting a fake as a mental rush. Another described it as feeling like a flock of hummingbirds suddenly popping in and out of dozens of way stations in their mind.
Okay, I have to stop you there because describing a multi-million-dollar authentication process as a flock of hummingbirds is just wildly imprecise.
It sounds crazy, I know.
I mean, if I'm a museum director about to spend $10 million on a statue, I do not want to hear about hummingbirds.
But this is exactly what happened to Having himself. The Getty Museum was preparing to purchase a kouros, which is this supposedly 2,000-year-old Greek marble statue.
And they had all the proof it was real, right?
Oh, mountains of it. Documentation, geological surveys, legal provenance. But when Having stood in front of it for the very first time, the very first word that popped into his head was fresh.
Fresh.
Yes, fresh, which is the single worst adjective you could possibly associate with a 2,000-year-old antiquity.
Yeah, you want ancient, not fresh.
Exactly. But in that exact moment, he couldn't point to the chiseling technique or the weathering on the marble to explain why it looked fresh. He just felt it in his bones.
And the Getty kouros is a perfect illustration of the conflict we face here, because society demands a paper trail.
Always. We have built our entire corporate and academic infrastructure on the premise of rational, step-by-step logic.
Right. We revere leaders who can point to a spreadsheet or a rigorous management framework to justify their actions.
Yeah.
It provides this sense of safety and predictability.
But when a highly successful, Billionaire investor like George Soros admits publicly that he routinely changes his massive financial positions in the market simply because his back starts going into sudden, severe spasms.
Yeah, that deeply unnerves people.
It really does. People hate it.
But I want to push back on this entirely. Let's look at this through the lens of a modern corporate environment. I understand the concept of the locked door.
Okay, lay it out.
It is like looking at a computer monitor. You see the graphical output on the screen, a beautiful web page or a complex financial model. That output is the final decision.
Right.
But you have zero access to the background CPU processes, the millions of microscopic calculations happening on the silicon every millisecond to render that image. You just get the results.
It's a great analogy.
But here's the problem. In a boardroom, if I'm trying to kill a major merger, I cannot walk in and say, my internal CPU is rendering a bad feeling and my back hurts.
Right, you'd get laughed out of the room.
Exactly. I need the PowerPoint. I need the footnotes. So how do we actually apply this without sounding like we are just making wild guesses?
So the distinction lies in the concept of calibrated expertise. The mistake we make in the boardroom isn't demanding data. It is assuming that all valid data can be immediately articulated.
Interesting. So you're saying the gut feeling is data.
Yes. When an executive with 20 years of deep, immersive experience in an industry suddenly feels a visceral warning about a deal, their internal CPU isn't guessing.
It's calculating.
It is processing millions of microvariables, subtle shifts in the counterparty's language, incongruities in the financial structure, historical patterns of failure, and it's serving up a synthesized conclusion.
So the practical application here is not to abandon spreadsheets.
No, of course not. It is to recognize that when a genuine expert has a sudden, inexplicable flash of insight, you must treat that insight as a highly valuable data point in itself.
You don't dismiss it just because it lacks a slide deck.
Exactly. You pause, you respect the hummingbirds, so to speak, and you dedicate resources to figure out what their unconscious mind has already spotted.
Okay, so we have to respect the output of the CPU, even if we can't read the code. But this raises a massive question for me.
What's that?
If our unconscious is down there quietly crunching all this complex data, what else is it doing? I mean, if it has the power to manage my investment portfolio and dissect a tennis serve in fractions of a second, I need to know how much control it actually has over my daily life.
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. And to understand the sheer scope of what the unconscious mind is managing, we have to examine the groundbreaking work of the psychologist John Bargh.
Okay, tell me about Bargh.
He conducted a series of experiments on a phenomenon known as priming, and these experiments basically fundamentally changed how we view human agency.
Are these the scrambled sentence experiments?
Yes, exactly.
These are absolutely mind-bending because, okay, imagine you are a healthy, vibrant, 20-year-old college student.
Right, the prime of your life.
A researcher asks you to participate in a simple language proficiency test. You walk down a long corridor, sit in a small room, and you are handed a piece of paper.
Just a standard, boring test.
Right. And on it is a list of 5-word sets. Your only task is to extract 4 of those words to make a grammatically correct sentence as quickly as possible.
It is designed to look like the most mundane task imaginable. You see a set of words like him, was, worried, she, always, and you quickly rearrange it to she was always worried.
Or like sky, the seamless gray becomes the sky is gray.
Exactly. It requires just enough cognitive effort to keep your conscious mind fully occupied.
But the test itself is a Trojan horse.
It really is.
Embedded within those random word sets are specific targeted trigger words. For one group of students, the test contains words like Florida, bingo, gray, wrinkle, and lonely.
Words associated with being elderly.
Right. The students take the test. It lasts maybe 5 minutes. They hand it in, and they are told they are free to go. They walk out the door and head back down that same long hallway.
And that hallway is where the actual experiment takes place. Bargh and his team had secretly timed how long it took the students to walk down the corridor before the test, and they timed them again as they walked away after the test.
And the results were just staggering.
Completely. The students who had been exposed to the words associated with old age, Florida, bingo, wrinkle, they actually physically walked significantly more slowly down the hallway after the test than the control group.
I just need to make sure you fully grasp what is being said here. Reading the word bingo on a piece of paper physically altered the kinetic movement of a 20-year-old's body.
Yes.
Their legs moved slower. Their posture changed. And they had absolutely no idea what was happening.
That is the essence of priming right there. The words acted as subtle environmental cues that bypassed the conscious mind entirely.
It's almost creepy.
It is. But Barg wanted to see just how far this influence could reach. Like, could it change not just physical speed, but complex social behavior?
So they did another test.
Yeah, he and his colleagues, Mark Chen and Laura Burrows, designed a second experiment. This time, they created two different versions of the scrambled sentence test.
Okay, what were the words this time?
One version was seeded with words related to aggression and rudeness. Words like intrude, infringe, bother, disturb.
Of the other version.
The second version was seeded with words related to politeness. Respect, yield, patiently, courteous.
The setup for the payoff here is ingenious, because the students finish the test and are instructed to walk down the hall to find the lead researcher to get their next assignment.
Right.
But when the student approaches the researcher is standing in the hallway, deeply engaged in a conversation with someone else. They are completely blocking the student and just ignoring them.
It's awkward on purpose. The researchers were measuring one very specific metric. How many seconds would elapse before the student interrupted the conversation to ask for their assignment?
Which is a tough situation for anyone.
Yeah, the baseline expectation for a polite college student is to wait a minute or two. But the primed groups showed a massive divergence.
That happened.
The students who had been primed with the polite words, yield, respect, they were incredibly passive. The vast majority of them never interrupted at all.
Never.
Never. They just stood there quietly for the full 10 minutes until the experiment was basically called off.
Wow. But the group that read the rude words, the ones who unscrambled words like intrude and bother.
They were aggressively impatient. They interrupted the researcher in under 5 minutes on average. Some interrupted almost immediately.
That is wild. What we're observing here is the operation of what psychologists call the adaptive unconscious.
Yes, or as I like to think of it, a highly efficient mental valet.
A mental valet. I like that.
Yeah, because the human brain consumes a massive amount of energy, and conscious, deliberate thought is the most computationally expensive thing we do.
Right. It takes work to think hard.
So to survive and function efficiently, the brain delegates an enormous amount of high-level processing to this mental valet, like a sophisticated autopilot system on a commercial jetliner.
So the adaptive unconscious sizes up the environment, interprets social cues, sets micro goals, and initiates action.
Exactly. So in the Barg experiments, while the conscious mind is entirely distracted by the puzzle of unscrambling the sentence, the mental valet is scanning the room, reading the words, and drawing conclusions.
It sees Wrinkle in Florida and says, we must be in an environment where elderly behavior is appropriate. I will adjust the motor cortex to slow our walking speed.
Precisely. And it happens entirely without asking the conscious mind for permission or even notifying it that a change has occurred.
Okay, I am going to stop you because I refuse to accept the implications of this without a fight.
I don't blame you.
We hold the concept of free will as the defining characteristic of humanity. I decide how I walk. I decide if I'm going to be rude or polite.
Of course.
But you are telling me that my level of social aggression, my physical velocity, can be hijacked by a few random words printed on a piece of paper.
I mean, the data is the data.
If my mental valet is just blindly reacting to whatever vocabulary happens to be in the room, does free will even exist, or are we just sophisticated meat robots reacting to inputs?
It is a deeply philosophical question, but the neuroscience suggests a compromise. Our free will is bounded by our environment far more than we realize.
So I am a meat robot.
No.
Yeah.
You are not a robot, but you are an organism highly adapted to conform to your surroundings. The mental valet evolved to help you survive by instantly aligning your behavior with the social context.
Right, so it's a survival tool.
It is supposed to be helpful. Imagine if you had to consciously calculate how softly to speak when entering a library, or how aggressively to maneuver when stepping onto a crowded trading floor.
Oh, you would be paralyzed by the cognitive load.
Exactly. The valet handles the background adjustments, so your conscious mind is free to focus on higher-order problems.
Okay, I can see the evolutionary benefit. It's an efficiency mechanism. If I walk into a chaotic, loud startup office with heavy metal playing, my valet pumps me up.
Yes.
If I walk into a hushed corporate law firm, my valet makes me walk softly. So how does a leader actually use this?
The business application is profound. It means that the physical and linguistic environment of your company is not just window dressing. It is an active behavioral programming tool.
So the posters on the wall actually matter.
The words you put on the wall, the tone of the emails you send, the spatial layout of the desks, these are all continuous inputs feeding the mental valets of your employees and your customers.
Wow. So if you want a collaborative, highly communicative team, you cannot achieve that simply by sending out a memo demanding teamwork.
Right, because the memo is just conscious information. You have to physically prime the environment with cooperative cues. If you use aggressive, zero-sum language in your internal communications, you are actively priming your staff to interrupt, to hoard information, and to compete internally.
Regardless of what your official core values say.
Regardless, your employees' valets are always watching, even when their conscious minds are focused on a spreadsheet.
Okay, but if the mental valet is essentially a sponge, soaking up environmental cues and adjusting my behavior to match, that seems great when I'm walking into a library.
Sure.
But what happens when the environment isn't neutral? What happens when the cues the valet is picking up are actively hostile, toxic, or heavily burdened with societal baggage?
That is the dark side of rapid cognition, and it's incredibly important to talk about. When the environment is loaded with negative assumptions, the valet can become your worst enemy.
And there's research on this, right?
Yes. To understand the devastating mechanics of this, we have to look at the research conducted by psychologists Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson.
What did they do?
They investigated how the adaptive unconscious interacts with systemic cultural stereotypes, particularly in high-stakes academic environments.
Right. They set up an experiment using questions from the graduate record examination, the GRE.
The intensely difficult standardized test required for admission to most graduate schools.
Yeah. They brought in a group of highly intelligent, capable Black college students to take this exam.
The researchers divided these students into two groups. The test itself was identical for both groups. The only difference was a tiny administrative detail that occurred before the test even began.
What was the detail?
One group was handed a standard biographical questionnaire to fill out basic information, name, major, things like that. The second group was handed the exact same questionnaire, but it included one additional question.
Let me guess, race.
Yes. It simply asked the student to identify their race by checking a box.
Just a single checkbox. A tiny, innocuous administrative request. What was the outcome?
The group that was asked to identify their race before the exam scored exactly half as well as the group that was not asked.
Half. Their scores were cut in half. Let me push you on the actual biology of this because it sounds like dark magic.
It does, but it's neurobiology.
How does moving a pencil to check a demographic box literally erase someone's ability to do complex algebra or reading comprehension? Mechanically, what is happening in the brain?
It comes down to the architecture of working memory and the concept of cognitive load. Working memory is essentially the RAM of your brain.
The temporary storage.
Right. It is the limited mental workspace you use to hold numbers in your head, manipulate variables, and solve complex problems. When a Black student is sitting in an academic testing environment, they are already navigating a society that holds deep-seated, toxic stereotypes regarding race and intelligence.
The societal baggage.
Yes. So when that student is forced to check a box identifying their race, it acts as a massive psychological prime.
The valet sees the cue.
Exactly. The adaptive unconscious recognizes the cue and instantly surfaces the cultural stereotype. It triggers a state known as stereotype threat.
Stereotype threat.
The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, lights up. The student's unconscious begins processing a massive existential fear. Basically, if I perform poorly on this test, I will confirm the negative stereotype about my group.
So it's not that they suddenly forgot how to do math. It's that their mental RAM is being hijacked by anxiety.
Precisely. Managing the emotional weight of that stereotype threat requires massive computational power. The mental valet is desperately trying to suppress the anxiety, and in doing so, it steals resources away from the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the part of the brain responsible for logical problem solving.
Right. It is exactly like trying to run a high-end video editing program on your computer while a massive, memory-draining virus scan is running in the background. The system slows to a crawl.
That makes perfect sense. The test score drops by half, not because of a lack of ability, but because half of their cognitive capacity is tied up fighting a ghost that the checkbox basically summoned into the room.
That's exactly it.
And the true tragedy of this experiment is revealed in the post-test interviews. Because just like the Barg experiments with the walking speed, The students had no idea they were being primed.
No idea at all.
When the researchers asked the students who performed poorly why they struggled, they didn't say, well, the demographic question triggered a systemic stereotype threat that depleted my working memory.
No, they internalized the failure entirely. They said things like, I just don't think I'm smart enough to be in this program.
That breaks my heart.
They took an environmental sabotage and interpreted it as a fundamental personal flaw.
This proves that the mental valet is not always a benevolent assistant. Sometimes it is like having a well-meaning assistant who secretly reads toxic tabloids all day, internalizes terrible gossip, and then subtly sabotages your life based on those lies.
All while convincing you that it's your own fault.
Exactly.
That is a stark but highly accurate analogy. The takeaway for anyone designing a system, whether you are an educator designing a test, a manager building a performance review process, or a recruiter designing an interview loop, is that neutrality is a myth.
Right. You cannot simply say, the test is the same for everyone, therefore the playing field is level.
Because the environment surrounding the test isn't level.
Exactly.
You must aggressively audit your environments for unnecessary demographic triggers, negative framing, or implicit biases. If a seemingly harmless administrative step is accidentally priming your candidates with anxiety-inducing stereotypes, you are no longer measuring their actual talent or intelligence.
You are merely measuring the capacity of their adaptive unconscious to withstand a psychological attack.
Exactly. You are leaving massive amounts of human potential on the table simply because you don't understand how the locked door operates.
All right, this is getting really intense. If the mental valet can be this easily hijacked, if a word like bingo can slow me down and a demographic box can crash my mental RAM, the logical response for any highly analytical person is to want to bypass the system entirely.
Sure, just turn it off.
Right. We worship pure, unadulterated logic. Why can't I just turn off the valet? Why can't I just use sheer, cold rationality to evaluate the data and make my decisions?
Because it is the ultimate fantasy of the modern business world, the purely rational actor. We all want to be like Spock.
Yes, exactly. Spock is the ideal.
But to understand why that is a biological impossibility and to see what life is actually like without the mental valet, we have to look at the pioneering work of the neurologist Antonio Damasio.
Okay, tell me about Damasio.
Damasio spent his career studying a very specific type of brain injury. He worked with patients who had suffered highly localized damage to an area called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex.
The ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Where is that, and what does it actually do?
It is a small region situated just behind the bridge of your nose. And in the architecture of the brain, it serves as a critical bridge.
A bridge between what?
It connects the deep, ancient emotional centers of the brain, the areas that generate fear, reward, and physical sensations, with the highly evolved, logical, analytical areas of the prefrontal cortex.
So it connects the feeling part and the thinking part.
Yes. It is the conduit between what you think and what you feel.
So what happens when that bridge is destroyed by a tumor or a stroke?
The fascinating thing about Damasio's patients is what doesn't change. Their intelligence remains completely intact. Their memory is fine. Their ability to process complex data and use logic is flawless.
So they're still smart.
By every standard metric of cognitive intelligence, they are perfectly normal.
But they lose the valet.
They lose the ability to integrate emotional signals into their logical processing, and the result is complete behavioral paralysis.
Paralysis, like they can't move.
Decision paralysis. Damasio documented a famous interaction where he was trying to schedule a simple follow-up appointment with one of these patients. Damasio offered 2 possible dates for the following month.
Okay. A normal person would look at their calendar, feel a slight preference for a Tuesday over a Wednesday, and just pick one.
Right. It takes 5 seconds.
So what did the patient do?
This patient pulled out his appointment book and spent the next 30 minutes locked in a relentless cost-benefit analysis.
30 minutes.
Yes. He evaluated previous engagements on those dates. He cross-referenced the proximity of those dates to other potential appointments. He began analyzing the statistical probability of meteorological conditions, the weather, on those specific days.
For a simple doctor's appointment.
He generated a massive, perfectly logical decision tree.
He spent 30 minutes trying to pick between a Tuesday and a Wednesday.
And at the end of the 30 minutes, he still couldn't choose. Damasio finally had to just interrupt him, pick a date for him, and say, "You will come on Thursday."
And how did the patient react?
The patient simply said, "That's fine," put his book away, and left.
That is astonishing.
Yeah.
It's as if his brain is trapped in an infinite loop of rendering data because there is no mechanism to tell him, this data is good enough, stop analyzing and just execute.
To really understand the mechanics of this paralysis, Damasio's team utilized a brilliant diagnostic tool known as the Iowa gambling task.
Oh, I've heard of this. It's really clever.
It's amazing. Imagine you were sitting at a table with 4 decks of cards in front of you, 2 red decks and 2 blue decks. You are given a bankroll of play money.
And the instructions are simple, right? Turn over cards one by one from any deck you choose.
Right. Some cards win you money, some cards cost you money. Your goal is to maximize your profit.
What the player doesn't know is that the game is completely rigged.
Totally rigged. The red decks are highly volatile, they offer massive payouts, but they also hide devastating penalties that will quickly bankrupt you.
And the blue decks are the safe play. Modest payouts, but very small, manageable penalties.
Exactly. But the crucial element of this experiment is the physiological monitoring. The researchers hooked the players up to a polygraph-like machine that specifically measures galvanic skin response.
Sweaty palms.
Yes. It measures the activity of the sweat glands in the palms of your hands. When the autonomic nervous system detects stress or danger, it triggers a microscopic release of sweat.
It's the literal sweaty palms feeling.
Yeah. Now, let's watch a healthy person play the game. They start flipping cards randomly, exploring the decks. After about 50 cards, they usually start to develop a conscious hunch that the red decks are dangerous.
50 cards, okay.
And by card 80, they can confidently explain the math and tell you exactly why the blue decks are the winning strategy.
So it takes 80 cards for the conscious logical mind to solve the puzzle.
Right, but look at the data from the sweat glands. After turning over just 10 cards long before the conscious mind has any idea what is going on, the healthy players start generating massive stress responses every time their hand reaches toward the red decks. Their palms start sweating at card 10, and simultaneously their behavior begins to change. They start favoring the blue decks, even though if you stopped them and asked why, they would say, I don't know, I just feel like picking blue.
So the mental valet figured out the math 70 cards faster than the conscious brain, and it communicated that discovery not with a spreadsheet, but with an emotional, physical signal.
Sweat.
It created a gut feeling.
Now, bring in the patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Remember, these are highly intelligent, purely logical individuals.
Right.
They sit down and play the game. And because their logic is intact, they eventually figure it out. By card 80, just like a normal person, they will tell you, the red decks are structurally disadvantageous. I am losing my bankroll on the red decks.
They possess the raw data. They know the truth.
But here is the devastating twist. The machines measuring their sweat glands record absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
They never generate a stress response. They never get sweaty palms. And because they lack that physical, emotional translation of the data, their behavior never changes.
Wait, really?
Even while verbally acknowledging that the red decks are destroying them, they continue to pick from the red decks until they are completely bankrupt.
They know the stove is hot, but they can't feel the burn, so they just keep their hand on it.
That's exactly what's happening.
This absolutely obliterates the myth of the emotionless business leader. We operate in a culture that worships pure data. But what Damasio's research proves is that data, utterly devoid of emotion, is useless.
It is paralyzing.
It is like having a sports car equipped with the most advanced, mathematically perfect GPS navigation system in the world, capable of mapping the optimal route to any destination. But the car has absolutely no engine.
I love that analogy.
The data is the map, but the emotion, the physical response generated by the mental valet, is the engine that actually drives human action.
That is the exact neurological reality. Pure rationality is not an ideal state. It is a profound cognitive deficit.
So what's the practical takeaway for us?
The practical takeaway here is that you must completely reframe how you view your own intuition. Your gut feelings, your sudden aversions, that subtle knot in your stomach when reviewing a contract, these are not irrational distractions.
They're calculations.
They are the output of a highly evolved, deeply analytical data processing system. The mental valet is analyzing millions of variables in the background and translating that complex math into a physical sensation you can act on immediately.
Because in high-stakes, fast-moving environments, You do not have 30 minutes to weigh the pros and cons of every micro decision.
You need the sweaty palms to survive.
This is a massive paradigm shift. We
Yeah.
absolutely need the mental valet. We need those emotional, physical signals to function in the real world.
Completely.
But this brings us to a huge, glaring problem.
Which is?
If my valet is making the actual decisions behind a locked door and merely sending me physical signals like sweaty palms or a vague feeling that something is fresh, how do I explain myself to the world? When my board of directors asked me why I killed the deal, or my spouse asked me why I bought a specific house, I can't say, well, my ventromedial prefrontal cortex generated a stress response.
No, you definitely can't say that.
So what do?
We invent a story.
We just lie.
It is not a conscious, malicious lie. It is a psychological phenomenon known as confabulation. We face what is called the storytelling problem.
The storytelling problem.
Because our conscious mind is completely isolated from the unconscious machinery driving our snap decisions, it finds itself in a very awkward position. It literally doesn't know why we just did what we did.
Right.
But the human brain abhors a vacuum, and it hates feeling ignorant. So the conscious brain seamlessly steps in and invents a highly plausible, deeply rational-sounding story to explain the actions of the unconscious.
And the scariest part is, we believe our own stories completely.
Totally. To really nail down how this works, let's look at the speed dating experiment conducted at Columbia University by researchers Sheena Iyengar and Raymond Fisman.
Speed dating is the ultimate crucible for snap decisions.
It is the perfect laboratory. Before the event began, the researchers interviewed the participants to establish their baseline preferences.
Okay.
Let's look at a hypothetical participant named Mary. They asked Mary, "What are your criteria for a romantic partner?" Mary, using her conscious, logical brain, provides a very reasonable, structured list.
Makes sense.
She says, "I am looking for someone who is older than me, established in their career, highly educated, and emotionally reserved."
A perfectly rational, spreadsheet-approved list of traits.
Then Mary enters the room and goes through the speed dating process, spending 3 minutes with dozens of different men.
Snap decisions happening over and over.
Exactly. At the end of the night, the researchers collect her scorecard to see who she actually wanted to see again. And the men she selected completely violate her stated criteria.
Of course they do.
She chose men who are younger, perhaps struggling artists, outgoing, and highly extroverted. The snap judgments made by her adaptive unconscious in the room completely overrode her conscious, logical preferences.
Now, if the researcher stops Mary on her way out to her car and asks, "Mary, why did you pick the younger, extroverted, struggling artist when you explicitly stated you wanted an older, established professional?"
Mary isn't going to say, "Well, my adaptive unconscious recognized a highly compatible mate based on subtle pheromonal cues, microexpressions, and a favorable assessment of physical symmetry."
Right. No one talks like that.
No, her conscious brain will instantly invent a narrative. She will say, "Oh, he just had this really great energy, and we had a fascinating conversation about French cinema, and I just felt a connection."
She will weave a story out of the available conscious material to justify a decision she did not actually make.
Yes. And to prove just how extreme this storytelling impulse is, we have to talk about the swinging rope experiment by the psychologist Norman Mailer.
This is one of my favorite psychological studies because it is so incredibly elegant, and the results are almost comical.
It's hilarious. Mailer designed an insight puzzle. He brought subjects into a room that was entirely empty, except for 2 long ropes hanging from the ceiling.
Just 2 ropes.
The ropes were positioned far enough apart that a person could not hold on to one rope and reach the other.
And the objective of the puzzle is to tie the 2 ropes together.
Right. The room also contained a few random, mundane objects scattered on the floor, some extension cords, a pole, and the heavy pair of pliers.
And the correct solution to the puzzle requires a lateral leap of imagination. You have to take the heavy pair of pliers, tie it to the end of one of the ropes, and pull it back to set it swinging like a pendulum.
Exactly. Then you walk over, grab the second rope, wait for the first rope to swing into your reach, catch it, and tie them together.
It is a classic aha moment puzzle. You either see the physics of the pendulum, or you sit there completely stumped.
And most people were stumped. They would try stretching, they would try using the pole to hook the rope, but nothing worked.
So what did Mailer do?
Mailer would let them struggle for 10 full minutes. Then the researcher would casually walk into the room. Without saying a single word, without making eye contact, the researcher would walk past one of the hanging ropes and subtly brush their shoulder against it, causing the rope to swing back and forth just a few inches.
The tiny, almost imperceptible physical cue injected into their peripheral vision.
The reaction was almost instantaneous. Within seconds of that rope moving, the subject's face would light up. They would say, "I've got it."
Wow.
They would immediately grab the pliers, tie them to the rope, set the pendulum in motion, and solve the puzzle.
The mental valet saw the swinging rope, instantly calculated the physics, and handed the solution up to the conscious mind.
Exactly. But here's where Mayer sprang the trap.
Oh, this is the best part.
After they solved it, he interviewed them. He asked a very simple question. How did you figure that out? Remember, the researcher had just handed them the answer on a silver platter by bumping the rope.
But the conscious mind just missed it. Did anyone say, well, I was stumped for 10 minutes and then you walked and bumped the rope, and that visual cue sparked the idea of a pendulum?
Almost no one. Instead, their conscious brains went into overdrive to protect their sense of agency. They fabricated wildly elaborate, completely fictional stories to explain their sudden stroke of genius.
What did they say?
One subject, who happened to be a psychology professor, gave a response that perfectly encapsulates the confabulation process. When asked how he solved it, he said, and I'm quoting the study here, "Having exhausted everything else, the next thing was to swing it. I thought of the situation of swinging across a river. I had imagery of monkeys swinging from trees. This imagery appeared simultaneously with the solution."
Monkeys swinging from trees.
Yes.
He literally hallucinated a rationalization involving primates in a jungle, rather than admit his unconscious picked up a physical clue he didn't actively notice.
And this is the most critical point. He was not lying. He was not trying to deceive the researcher. He genuinely, subjectively believed that his insight came from a spontaneous daydream about monkeys.
That is wild.
This reveals the core danger of the storytelling problem. We never feel ignorant. We always feel like we are in total control.
Our conscious brain acts as a masterful, highly paid PR agent, confidently stepping up to the microphones to deliver a highly plausible, totally fabricated press release to explain the actions of a CEO that operates behind a locked door.
That is the perfect way to summarize it.
This completely upends how I view the world, especially the world of business. If we rely on asking people to explain their own thinking, we are building systems on a foundation of hallucinations.
Yes, we are.
Think about the billions of dollars spent on traditional market research. Think about exit interviews when an employee quits. Think about focus groups where we ask consumers, why did you buy our new product?
It's all suspect.
Are we just collecting thousands of variations of the monkey swinging from trees? Are customers giving us rational-sounding answers because they genuinely don't know why their mental valet rejected the product?
That is exactly what is happening. Asking someone to explain the output of their adaptive unconscious is asking them to translate a language they do not speak.
So what's the alternative?
This is why in entrepreneurship, in product design, and in leadership, behavioral data is infinitely more reliable than self-reported explanations. You must watch what people do, not what they say.
Right.
People will always tell you what sounds plausible, what aligns with their conscious self-image, and what they think you want to hear. But the truth of their motivation is locked away.
Let's bring all of these threads together. We started with Vic Braden and the absolute terror of knowing a double fault was coming without knowing how he knew it.
Right.
We explored the immense power of the mental valet, how a simple word like bingo can physically slow our walking speed, and how a toxic demographic checkbox can trigger a threat response that crashes our cognitive RAM. We saw, through the tragic lives of Damasio's patients, that an existence without this unconscious emotional engine leaves us paralyzed in an endless loop of logic, unable to even pick a date on a calendar.
Exactly.
And finally, we confronted the unsettling reality that our conscious minds are totally unreliable narrators, constantly spinning fictional stories about monkeys to justify the brilliance of our own unconscious.
The soul of this chapter is a profound and humbling paradox. Our most powerful, accurate, and rapid decisions, the mechanisms that actually keep us alive and guide our expertise, are made in a room we simply do not have the key to.
Wow.
To succeed in a complex, fast-moving world, we must learn to trust the mental valet. We must carefully and intentionally curate the environments that feed it data. And most importantly, we must entirely stop trusting the neat, rational stories people tell to explain their own gut actions.
If our conscious minds are really just PR agents spinning stories to justify the actions of our unconscious, the ultimate question remains, who is actually running the company of you?
It's a question worth asking every day.
The next time you make a major life decision, the next time you launch a new product, or the next time you instantly decide to reject a job candidate, force yourself to pause and ask, Is this pure logic, or did someone just swing a rope in my peripheral vision?
I love that.
And next time on our deep dive into these sources, we are going to explore the absolute darkest side of this rapid cognition. We will look at what happens when that locked door hides our worst, most destructive biases, and how a remarkably unqualified man was elected President of the United States simply because he happened to look the part.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.